Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the third episode of my 2020 propagation efforts. We'll call it. I've done several other seasons of propagation, and I've built different types of greenhouses, and I've used different kinds of systems to do my mist irrigation. I've taught how to do them just in a shady space in a plastic box without any kind of sophisticated mist. If you want to go back and look at those, I'll link that playlist, that propagation playlist up here in the corner if you're watching on YouTube. And you can go back and look at different ways to do this. This season I'm using this electronic leaf, which I've covered here in the first two videos. It's working great. The first episode I went through my setup. In the second one, I put this flat of super easy to root things in. This was like 4 days ago, and I've already got roots on several things already. I'll bring this potato vine, which is super easy to root. So I would not have expected any other result than having roots on these things in 3 or 4 days. The things that have not rooted yet are calloused, meaning the edges where the roots are going to come from have burned, and they're ready to root. I think within the next few days I'll have roots on everything. Here's this hibiscus right here. Hopefully you can see that, where it's that white callousing that's right there. That will be another day or two. We'll have roots all along that wound. So working perfect. So that's what I wanted to do initially, was just kind of stress test my the electronic leaf, since it was it's a new one that I just bought. And so everything's working great. I'm going to go ahead and put a second flat in here. Also pretty easy to root things, just a few perennials from my yard. This year, the first year in this landscape, I got a lot of one-of-a-kind things. I'd like to do more drifts of color next year, so I'm going to take a few of the perennials that I have in the yard and do more of them, and so that way I'll have, going into next spring, and then I'll just overwinter them. I'll root them in these trays. I'll probably end up putting them in like a 3 or 4 inch pot, and then overwintering them, and then put them in the ground next spring. So let me show you what the cuttings that I took today. So this is the second tray that I'll be putting into the greenhouse over there, which the greenhouse is just an open space. It's got that shade cloth over the top of it. It's really not closed in. As hot as it is outside right now, I'm just not, it's hot enough to get these things to root without any kind of plastic around them. If it got cool pretty quickly, I might build some sort of plastic covering over that area out there. But thus far, I think everything's going to root perfect. It's hot, it's humid, and it's in the shade. That's really all that would be required. Again, this is a peat moss and perlite mix in a 50 cell tray, exactly the same as the last video. And these cuttings are going to look exactly the same as the last video. I've got some African basil cuttings that I took from the front yard, and these should root super easy. African basil is a cross of 2 different basils, and it's considered a perennial basil, and you have to do it from cuttings. The seed is not viable. So in order to have these for next year, I'm going to do quite a few of them from cuttings. The pollinators absolutely love this African basil, and it smells fantastic, and you can smell it just walking by it in the yard. But again, the cuttings are exactly the same as what I did last week. You're just going to go, I did open some new pruners. These are actually fruit pruners here that I've had for a long time. It's still in the package. I've had these for years. I've never opened them. The pair of pruners that I was using in that first video are quite dull, and I need to get them sharpened or sharpen them myself. So here's the first cutting. I'm going to take the bottom leaves off, just like I did the other day. You can open the wound up a little bit more if you want to, just scraping along here with the blade, and we want to stop the new growth on the top of it. I'm using that same rooting gel that I used in the last video. All of these things are linked down below. I'm putting it in the tray, maybe an inch and a half down, and pinching it in. We don't want the cuttings too deep. I said all this in the last video as well. Same thing with this next one. I've got basically 2 sets of leaves. I'm pulling off the bottom set. I'm leaving that maybe 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch below that first set of leaves, and I'm scraping along that, just like that, and I'm stopping the new growth on the top right there. And that's what our cutting ends up looking like. It's got that wound right here on the bottom of it, and then the new growth on the top of it is basically stopped. Dipping it into rooting gel, putting it in about 1.5 inches down, and that's pretty much it. This last one, I'll pull these two side pieces off, and that created my wound. I'm taking the new growth off of it, exactly the same. Any flowers that you have, there's lots of flowers on these. Any flowers, I'm going to pull those off, and that's it. And I'm going to do 3 rows of these African basil real quick. So there's my 3 rows of my African basil right there, and I can take cuttings off of these all season next year as well, and make as many of them as I want. They root super, super easy. The next thing I've got, I took some cuttings off some a salvia called Teresa. It's a small leaf salvia, white flowers, blooms like crazy. Got a pink, hopefully you can see this right here. It's got a pink flower. It's a kind of a pink flower with a white throat right there. Really nice salvia. I'd like to have quite a few of these. They're fantastic for pollinators. I'm going to, I think I only have enough maybe here to do a couple rows of these, but these are much smaller. The leaf internodes are much closer together. So if I come down here to the bottom of this cutting and I pull off the bottom set of leaves right there, and then I wound it a little bit with my blade, I can go right above that next group of leaves right here and cut that, and and there's a little bit of new growth on that, but there's tiny cuttings, but they'll work great. I'm going to do a couple rows of these, but you can see on something like this where the leaf internodes are really close together, you can get lots of cuttings out of a single stem. But I'll pull off the next bottom set of leaves right there. I'll wound that, and then I'll cut just above the next group. And the next group has the flower bud sticking off the side of it. But there's the cutting right there, and I'll wound that bottom a little bit with my blade, just barely, but small. Dip it in the gel, stick it in maybe 1 inch down. Here's another one right here. I'll pull the bottom set off. I'll cut just above the next set. I'll wound that bottom if it's not. This one doesn't have any new growth on it at all. Nothing to cut there. Into the gel and into the tray. Pull off the next set of bottom leaves. Cut just above that. And a little bit of new growth I'll terminate the end of right there. Again, super easy, and these should root super fast. Salvia typically root pretty quickly. I'll go ahead and I'm going to do 2 rows of these Teresa salvia. So on these Teresa salvia, I actually ended up doubling them up. I actually ended up putting 2 in each cell right here, which is fine on something small like these perennials. That way, if one doesn't root, I'm almost guaranteed to get 1 rooted cutting in each cell now for sure. I don't like to do that on shrubs. A lot of people do, but on some small perennial like this, if I have extra material that I'm not going to use, I'll double them up. I'm doing these cuttings on top of this tray just for demonstration purposes. Normally I would just cut all these up and then I would stick them. In doing the way I'm doing it right now, I'm actually leaving little bits of material here that I'm disposing of, and I don't want any of that mixed in. I'm trying to keep this, what I do is about once a week I'll go in here. These things will drop leaves and I'll go in and clean the trays up. I don't want those rotting leaves sitting on the tray. Let's see. Okay, the next thing I got is this Verbena bonariensis right here, and the leaf nodes are super far apart on these. Any part of the stem will root. I don't necessarily need the leaf node to go into the soil, but that's the way I'm going to do it. And it's super, super long. I'll show you in a minute. The pieces I cut down closer to the bottom are not that far apart, but I do have better success rooting from those leaf nodes. But I could cut this in half and just root it from the stem as well, just wounding the stem. But the pieces on this verbena that are closer, okay, this is not a good example of that at all. The pieces, as it gets closer to the base of the plant, the leaf nodes get a little bit closer together, and I'm able to get a cutting that's more reasonable size, and I wounded the bottom of it. All I did was leave, a couple leaves at the top. These will root super fast. These can be done from seed. In fact, the one that I'm rooting from right now was one that I did from seed earlier this year. But they're super fast from cuttings. These are just great for all types of pollinators. I absolutely love these. Again, here's 2 sets of leaves. I'm cutting above that one, pulling the bottom 2 off, wounding the bottom of it. It's exactly the same process over and over and over again. But this verbena here, Bonariensis, is just fantastic for pollinators, and then the goldfinches go absolutely crazy for it, and I'm trying to get more goldfinches in the yard. Okay, so there's a set of two leaves right there. I'm going to pull this cutting was closer to the bottom of that plant, and the leaf nodes are closer together, but that's a perfect one right there. It's got some new growth on it right here, so I'm going to take that off. I think you can see that, and then boom. I'm going to do 2 rows of these verbena right here real quick. Again, I'll reiterate that I took these cuttings in a clean plastic bag, and they had dew on them early in the morning, so I didn't have to water them. Sometimes you'll take the cuttings dry, and they can't be in that bag dry like that. One other point that I haven't made is you don't want this bag out in the sun, because it'll heat up like a greenhouse and cook your cuttings in the bag. But if you have to put a little water in there to moisten them while you're waiting to prep them, put a little hole in the corner right here and just let that water, just hold the bag up like that and let the water run out of that hole that you put in it. But again, make sure you're using clean pruners. Clean pruners. I cleaned the table. I've got new materials that I'm using here. Everything is clean and sterile. We're putting wounds on plants and then expecting them to root. Okay, this is black and blue salvia. These are super, super vigorous. Easy to root. I don't need many of these because this one can get 4 feet tall every season. Dies to the ground in the winter, but you can see the flowers on it right there. The bees and pretty much every pollinator absolutely loves these, and they bloom all summer, pretty much nonstop. Lots of different types of salvias that I'll be doing in this series. Again, same thing over and over. I'm taking the bottom set of leaves off. I'm cutting above the next set of leaves right there. I'm going to remove any new growth, and the leaves are so big on these, I'm going to take one off, and I'm going to put a fresh cut on that bottom, because that was my cut that I actually took off the plant, dipped it in the rooting hormone, and I don't want these leaves to overlap, so I'll run them all the same direction. I don't want to run that big leaf toward the middle over top of another cutting. You'll see, I'll put the next one in that has a large, let's see, I found one with a large leaf here, and do the same thing. I'm taking those bottom ones off. That's what I'm left with right there. I'll wound that. Since when I pulled the leaf off, it didn't do it. I'll take that new growth off. And since it had those 2 larger leaves, I'll take one of them off, dip it in the rooting hormone, and I'll put that leaf the same direction as that one so they don't end up overlapping one another. But these are quick and easy, and almost anything on this plant will root. Old wood, new wood, doesn't really matter. But again, there it is. I left one leaf. I've got my leaf node down at the bottom right there, which is not necessary on some of these easy to root things, but they root super fast from that leaf node in the gel and in there. So I'm going to do 2 rows of these black and blue salvia real quick. So the black and blue salvia are done, and the next thing I'm going to do is actually this variegated vinca vine that I use in containers. Nothing could root easier than this vinca vine. It probably wouldn't matter what part of this you cut. It probably just wouldn't matter at all. I'm going to do exactly the same as I've been doing. I'm going to cut it near, I'm going to leave a leaf node where I took the leaves off at the bottom. Exactly the same. I've only left 5 spots here. That's about how many I want for my containers next year, and I can re-root this anytime I want to root it. But I'm going to go up 2 leaves on this vine, cut it right there, pull the bottom ones off, cut it close to where I just pulled those off, and I'll stick what's left of that right there. I'm going to double stick these because we can stick all we want in this. What I've got left is this. I'll pull these bottom leaves off and cut it kind of close to that, and just leave it just like that. exactly the same over and over and over again. Let me pull all this extra material out and dip this. And like I say, what I'm going to do is stick 2 of these in every single one. So like I talked about in the first episode, I use that bottom tray upside down like that to set my tray on top of, and it keeps some separation from the ground and the cuttings to prevent disease from anything that might be in the soil from causing us a problem. My irrigation is working perfect. So that's pretty much it. That's the second tray into the house. Again, it's all easy to root things. The next week here, I'm going to do shrubs. And so that video will be up sometime in the next 4 or 5 days. And I think when I show the next video, everything in this tray will be rooted. Most everything in that tray will probably be calloused or starting to root. But both, I think we have 10 varieties so far. And I don't have any reason to believe that everything that I've put in here so far won't root. I do monitor this very, very closely. I come out here several times a day and make sure that this new system is working properly, whether you're using a clock or using this electronic leaf or whatever system you're using. You do have to monitor it and make sure that it's not overwatering. Overwatering is a big enemy here. We do have to keep the leaves moist, but too much water will definitely cause us a problem. If your tray starts to get really super, super heavy, you're probably applying too much water. So again, thanks for following along with these propagation videos, and I'll be back with next week, and we'll get started on shrubs.